Hello, and welcome to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, where you'll hear advice from experienced safety leaders on how to protect your people and business. I'm Peter Steinfeld. Today, I'm talking with Melissa Agnes, founder and CEO of Crisis Ready Institute and author of the book Crisis Ready: Building an Invincible Brand in an Uncertain World. Melissa is a globally recognized authority in crisis management and has worked with organizations such as NATO and the U.S. Department of Defense. In 2020, she founded Crisis Ready Institute, dedicated to enhancing crisis resilience through training and industry standards. Let's listen in. Hey, Melissa, thanks for being here today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. Can you share just a bit about your background and how it led to the founding of Crisis Ready Institute?
Yeah, my background is, I suppose, going way back to the age of 21, I've been an entrepreneur. Found my way into crisis management, crisis communication. 2018 came out with a book that I designed to be a differentiator as a read because all of the books on this incredible subject were putting me to sleep. And if they were putting me to sleep, what were they doing to everybody else? So I wanted to create a book that was a different type of experience. What I didn't realize was that my ideology and my methodology, my approach to what I call crisis ready was very, very different. I didn't realize that that was the differentiator. When I got thousands of readers coming to me saying, why aren't other consultants doing what you're talking about in the book? I had no idea how to answer that. So I spent a couple months trying to figure it out. And I realized that the crisis ready approach is different because we look at it from a cultural standpoint. So crisis ready is not just having a plan that sits on a shelf. It's really about integrating mindset, skill set, and capability within the culture of the organization. So once I figured out that that was the answer, then the next question became, okay, how do I scale that? How do I bring this to more people, to more professionals, to more adults, to more organizations in a way that makes sense? Because I do believe that everybody should be taking this approach because it's not rocket science. It just makes sense to me. And then that is when the Institute was born.
Were you working in a job where you were doing it the old way, where you just kind of create these plans, put them on a shelf, and nobody really did anything with them? Or how did you get into this, really?
I was doing photo montages for senior people where I was losing more money than I would make on every sale, which then morphed into brand strategy, digital brand strategy, right at the cusp of when social media was blowing up and everybody was getting on the social media bandwagon from a branding perspective. Then it was literally like a light bulb morning of, if I was a cartoon, you would see that light bulb on top of my head, just go ding, where I realized that everybody's talking about how great social is and the real-time news cycle and all on digital and all these things, but nobody's talking about the risks. And I didn't see the risks as a negative. I saw the risks as inevitable, but also if we did start talking about them, then we could mitigate them. And then ahead of going through that mitigation could lead to unprecedented opportunity that for connection in times of crisis, which ultimately to me is what successful crisis management is. And that just sparked an idea. I had no idea what crisis management was. I had no idea that it was a thing. I just realized that, oh my goodness, this thing is speaking to my soul. So I spent a year devouring everything that I could on the subject, which is what was putting me to sleep. Meanwhile, it was also fueling me and getting me so excited. And I had a business partner at the time, and I kept saying to him, there's something here. I just don't quite know what it is yet. And then flash forward a year into that, I got a call from the VP of one of our clients' organizations, which was a real estate investment trust. We had just launched their website. And I get this call really early from the VP one morning saying that our president's in the car with a major prospective investor. The media on the radio is reporting that one of our buildings is about to explode.
Ooh.
It's not true. All of our investors are calling in. Apparently, this rumor started on this thing called Twitter. We have no idea what Twitter is. We don't even know how to find it, but somebody said it's digital. And because you just launched our website, we're hoping you can help us. So that was my first launch into crisis management. And within a half an hour, we had everything corrected. We had everything that needed to be was in place. And the next day, their stock price actually went up as a direct result of the way they managed it. And that was oh my goodness, I can serve. This is how I can serve. And then I just did what made sense to me. I didn't know what the traditional way was. I just know that what I did hear about crisis preparedness didn't make sense. And so my blog, that's how I launched into this market. I started a blog that was one of the first in the world to really start talking about the things I was talking about, the way I was talking about them. And then that just catapulted.
That's a fantastic story. And it's just a great reminder that it's important to have this like fresh perspective, bring in some people from the outside of the profession to help you see things that maybe you're not seeing because you got the blinders on.
Absolutely.
So what's your process for getting an organization crisis ready?
We look at the cultural component to it. Being crisis ready is cultural. Again, it's not a plan that sits on a shelf, like a line item that's checked off. And then that cultural component has three pieces that we look at. One is mindset. The second is skill set. And the third then is what we call capability, which is the typical planning process. So mindset and skill set. Mindset is the way that you fundamentally choose to see or view or interpret any type of situation in general, but any type of disruption, since we're talking about crisis, directly impacts the actions that you take, which will directly impact the results. So if you're seeing disruption as an annoyance or as something to avoid or push under the rug, then you're going to take a set of actions. If you're seeing it as in crisis ready, we look at successful crisis management is about coming out of a crisis with increased trust and credibility with those who matter most to the business, which is connection, human to human connection. So if you see a crisis as an opportunity for growth, evolution, and connection, as challenging as that is as a human being who does want to like self-protect and hide from the negative or the uncomfortable, then you're going to take a completely different set of actions in response, which will bring you in a completely different pathway for the results, the impact of the crisis. So that's mindset. And that needs to really, truly be led top down, supported bottom up, and permeate throughout the entirety of the organization every day. And then skill set. So my area of expertise is crisis communication / leadership. To me, they're pretty synonymous. We have team members that do the other components of crisis management, but I'll just speak for myself. So skill set, we haven't been taught in our society, in my opinion and my experience, the true ways to use language, to use energy, to use communication, to connect through emotion. And we haven't been taught that skill set because we've been raised in a society that says there's no place for emotion in the boardroom, or a strong leader is not emotive, right? Which when we're talking about crisis, we're talking about the most emotional points of a person's life. We're talking about emotion, for a heavy emotion for everybody involved, from the leader to the team to those who are impacted on the inside and outside. And we haven't been given that skill set for how do you actually resonate through emotion. One of the crisis ready rules is you can't beat emotion with logic. So how do you communicate in a time of crisis without just shielding yourself up from the emotion, leaning out of vulnerability and just spewing out facts and logic that will not resonate with those you're trying to connect with to lead them through the crisis? So that's the skill set that we're teaching. And then the capability is really, what's your governance structure? What are your processes, your protocols, your policies, your everything to make the ease in which mindset and skill set can be executed upon easy.
That's an excellent model. It's very simple and straightforward, but probably difficult for people to implement. And I just think back to experiences I've had with organizations. Maybe I'm buying something from them, a service, a product. It's a superficial relationship. I'm happy, but then something goes wrong. Those who don't handle it well, I never do business with again. Those who handle it well because they address it head on, they embrace it emotionally, and they find a solution for me, I'm a customer for life.
Absolutely. And that's issue management. So the beauty about a crisis ready culture is that you're going to tackle every challenge that way, internally and externally, from the smallest issue to the major catastrophic incidences.
Yeah, how you do the little things is how you're going to do the big things. So that's why it's so important to handle everything the same way.
Absolutely.
Well, with such a really thorough but simple model, it seems like a lot of organizations would find it pretty easy to implement this process, but I'm sure, as we both know, not always the case. So what are the most significant difficulties or perhaps roadblocks that get in the way of crisis readiness?
To put that simply, I would say human nature. So it goes against human nature, even before when I mentioned that the mindset is a challenge to how to see something disruptive or uncomfortable as an opportunity for growth, evolution, and connection. It's human nature to want to self-protect, to shelter up or to close off and to self-protect. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to lean into vulnerability. and which is what we need to do in order to actually create that connection that we're trying to achieve in successful crisis management. And anybody who is in this field, whether you're in-house or you're a consultant, you're going to know that one of the through lines of our forever challenges is gaining buy-in and support, which is where I say that human nature gets in the way. So a few years ago, I was really struck by why is there so much resistance when it's so good? It's so progressive. It's so evolutionary. It's so valuable and powerful. Why are people getting in their own way? And so I started to really observe this in all of my interactions in life and in business. And I've come to observe what I call the 5 crisis ready hindrances. So the 5 pieces of human nature that get in our way, that prevent us from truly embracing leaning into crisis ready, whether it's pre-crisis or during crisis management. And those 5 hindrances, just in alphabetical order, are avoidance, ego, fear, ignorance, and politics.
So when you think about those 5, which is the biggest hindrance?
I think that everything really comes down to ego, and then fear is a consequence or a derivative from ego. When I say ego, I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about pride. I'm not talking about narcissism. I'm talking about the identity that makes us individuals, right? Our self-identity that is our individuality. So it's the I that comes with being human. And in that sense, when we look at ego in that way, we're looking at something that the piece of being human that does not like change. Change can be good and it still feels scary for the ego because it's saying that's unsafe, right? It's its job to keep us safe and to protect us, but it doesn't realize or doesn't have the awareness to say, this is just uncomfortable and safe. It's not that it's not safe. And so when we're talking about, especially in crisis comms, when we're talking about leaning into vulnerability and tapping into and holding space for the energy of emotion, which is not ingrained in our learnings as part of our culture up until this point. We've been taught to suppress the emotion and to avoid emotion versus leaning into it. The ego says, especially in a crisis where you're leading and everybody is angry or fearful, or you might be fearful, or you're feeling all kinds of ways. The ego naturally is going to kick in and say and create a wall that creates disconnection. And that's when it becomes a hindrance, a crisis-ready hindrance, because if connection is that goal, that orientation towards successful crisis management, the ego comes in to self-protect and it creates disconnection. And then fear is a derivative from that.
As you're speaking there, I was thinking about the fact that just culturally around the world, humans are not raised in a culture of it's okay to fail. Instead, we get from day one, it's, oh, you walked, yay. Oh, you're still crawling. Oh, and it just starts that early.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. And then just over time, it's okay, I don't want to fail. And now you're talking about a crisis where things have failed. So now you're starting off with a failing situation and you want to now admit it further. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you have everybody whispering in your ear from legal that's only looking at the liability side of it, right? Which is very important, but it's not the whole picture. To yourself that as a leader might be saying, if I mess this up further, there's my reputation, there's my livelihood, there's everything me, which is human. That's the I. So now the ego, the I, the me is going to kick in and say, how do I self-preserve? How do I self-protect? Meanwhile, the thing that the Crisis Ready Institute is really working to empower people in is that the idea of, yes, we need to self-protect. That's normal. That's natural. Those feelings are natural. But how do we manage through those sentiments and those emotions and feelings and also have the courage to lean into the reality of the emotion that's happening right now so that we can have empathy and lead from that place, because empathy creates connection right there, right? So I'll give you 2 scenarios to try to articulate this better. You have a crisis that's happened. You have a group of people who are feeling intensely. So maybe they're fearful for their lives or their safety or those of their loved ones. Maybe they're grieving an incredible loss, right? They're feeling intensely. And you have a leader who comes up and he or she has the most beautifully crafted crisis communication speech or response that they're about to articulate. This crisis communication could go down in textbook history of exactly what to say. But they show up And as they speak, they're stoic and they're flat and there's no resonance emotionally or energetically. You're not going to feel the emotion in it and it's going to fall flat. And people are going to turn and feel all kinds of more intensely about maybe it's disappointment, now maybe it's rage, whatever it is, you've amplified or escalated the intensity of the emotion in a non-successful way. Versus you have a leader who comes out and they're standing in front of this group of people, same situation. And before they even speak, they have the courage to step in to that energy, to what is current and present right now, not in a way that is self-protecting, but is in a way of connection. And you can feel that they care just by the energy that they're emitting. And then they open their mouths from that place and say those beautifully crafted words. I have chills when I think of that. That is crisis communication mastery. That is what we're striving to empower, to teach and empower people to have the strength and the courage to lean into through the courses and through the work that we're doing.
I love that term you use, step into the energy, because that's so important. When you do that, then you, at least if not in reality speaking from the heart, at least it appears that way. And that's going to become over much better to the people you're talking to. But I can imagine that's really hard to train people to do. So how do you go in and advise organizations on the best way to overcome the 5 hindrances and step into the energy?
So overcoming the hindrances has to come from a place of wanting to,
Right.
because it all starts within, right? And it's little things. So for example, we have a 10-week course that teaches these things as a level 1. And part of the homework and the takeaways from that is over the span of, it's 10 weeks. So from this week to next week, when you feel some kind of uncomfortable emotion at work, at home, whatever it is, just as a practice of to first observe it, right? We are not how we feel, we just feel. So we can separate ourselves from that and to observe our thoughts, observe our patterns, observe the way that we feel, how is all these things. And then the second thing that a lot of people do is they put judgment to it. I shouldn't feel that way, or I feel shame for feeling that way. So the notion of what if it just is? What if there's no right or wrong? What if there's no good or bad? What if how you're feeling is exactly it just is. It's just how you're feeling. How would you then view it? Could you lean into the emotion a little bit more because now you've removed judgment from within? And then understanding too how to process emotion. So one of my favorite quotes is emotion is energy in motion, which means that if we're all just energy, which we are, then instead of suppressing or repressing or avoiding an emotion, if we could learn to just tolerate it, give it acceptance, and let it flow through us, research shows that it takes 90 seconds for that emotion, that wave of energy to flow through. And research shows that if you allow yourself to do that, after the 90 seconds, if you're still feeling that way, then that's your choice. So we have this process and it all starts within, and you have to have leaders, you have to have people who are willing to say, you know what, I want to learn this skill. I want to learn it for me. I want to learn it for the value and the quality of my relationships. And I know that that's going to translate into my leadership and my crisis communication abilities.
It sounds like there's probably some organizations where there are certain people who just can't embrace this, or they're just not going to come across great when they're speaking to people. So is it okay for a company to recognize that and say, just because you have the highest title doesn't mean you need to be the one out there speaking, and then maybe designate someone else who embraces this a little bit more to become that public spokesperson?
It's essential. Connection when you're in crisis. How do you come out of a crisis with deeper connection? That's what you're looking for from the communication standpoint.
Well, any other advice you have for organizations that are just starting their journey to become crisis ready?
In alignment with that, I would say one of the other crisis ready rules is people above process and bottom line always. And so in alignment with everything that we're saying, if you're at a point where you are faced with a challenge and you don't necessarily know which way is the right path or which path to follow, there might be a bunch of different pathways before you. Two things. One is fall back on your core values and have those defined as a crisis ready culture, have those defined and really instilled within the breadth of the organization and what it stands for. So fall back on your core values and remember that it's people first. Organizations, people who put process and bottom line first, it's the opposite of what needs to do and you're going to fail. When you put people first and you focus on what are our core values, how do we connect, how do we do right by the people that our organization is designed to serve in the first place, then process and bottom line, they're going to fall into place.
Yeah, and I go back to what you said very early on, that this is not just something you do when a crisis happens, it's a way of life. And if you live this way and you embrace everything that you're talking about, and this is how you run your organization day to day, I bet you'll avoid a number of crises.
You can't prevent every crisis, but you can be ready for anything. And by being crisis ready, you're so less prone, you're so less vulnerable for all the right reasons.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, what are you focused on right now? Any new projects in the works that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So our crisis ready course, which I just gave a sampling of like what the goal of that is, that's constantly on the go and then being developed into the first crisis ready certification. So anybody who's interested in that could check out crisisreadycourse.com. And then my personal, like real passion right now is empowering crisis communication consultants. So we have a whole program just for crisis communication consultants to help them strengthen their skills and their credibility, grow and scale their business, which is the impact that they're having on the world. I believe that this skill set is a superpower. So, and giving them a network of support. So just championing them, just like getting behind them and helping them do more of this incredible superpower that they have.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really love the passion that you bring to this industry. It's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
To learn more about Melissa and her work with Crisis Ready Institute, click the links in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, the industry's most intuitive emergency communication and threat intelligence solution. To learn more about how to protect your people and business during critical events, visit alertmedia.com. Until next time.